The City in the Sea, Part 2. Chapter 5. How? Bobby got a bus from Oxford Circus to Charing Cross. It was after 12 when he reached Cadogan Street and, turning on the electric light in his sitting room, sat down to smoke, to think, and to plan. It seemed to him that he had never come against the real things of life till now. Up to this he had followed the grooves worn and polished by other men. Even in story writing he had followed custom, the advice of experts, and the leading of his literary agent. Here was a business in which no other people were engaged, where there were no rules to follow, and where a mistake might land him in worse than difficulties. He would have to manufacture his own mechanism, guide it and direct it. The most essential part of that mechanism was its human element. He had fished with the Devonshire men of Plymouth and Brixham, and the thought of them had sprung to his mind at Baron's. But it was some years now since he had been on the Devonshire coast, and he had forgotten the very names of the men he had known there, but he had not forgotten certain facts about the Devonshire fishing people. They were like a huge family. They knew one another's affairs, and a man going off to the Mediterranean on a job like this would be sure to talk of it when he got back. And it was not a question of one man. He would want 6. Half a dozen men chattering on their return would mean that the port authorities, who are all in touch with the fisherfolk, would know of the matter in a week. Bribery would be no use. Bobby had enough imagination to see that a gallon of cider would be enough to undo the business, no matter how much money was spent on bribery. Well, failing Devonshire, where else could men be found? The docks? He knew enough of the docks to understand that this would be a very difficult place to work. There were loads of men to be found on the East India Dock Road or down in Lambert Road, Canning Town. But what sort of men? Men from the deep-sea ships, steamboat men who knew nothing of the handling of small sailing craft, men whose characters might be good or might be bad. Then, leaving the men aside, how about the vessel? Where could he go for a boat to suit his purpose? At 2 o'clock in the morning, by which time the whole proposition had taken on the colours of a nightmare and Baron's the appearance of a fiend, Bobby was knocking out the ashes of his last pipe when before him rose like an angel the picture of Samuel Hackett. Sam, bronzed and weather-beaten, just as he had seen him in the restaurant. Sam, with his old coat and scrubby beard and his absolute indifference to all things earthly but his boat and the sea. Sam, who lived as the gulls live in Poole Harbour, the man of all men to help, or at least point out where help might be obtained. Bobby put out the light in his sitting room, switched on the light in his bedroom, and went to bed, feeling that the weight of a world had been taken from his shoulders. Sam, from a man, had become an inspiration, a refuge, a star. Fantastic fears assailed Bobby as he lay awake in the dark, revolving the picture of Hackett in his mind. Suggestions that Sam, in his peregrinations in search of a suit of oilskins, might have been run over by an omnibus, or that he might fall sick, or be drowned before Bobby could get at him. No mother was ever more anxious for the safety of a child, yet a few hours ago news of the death of this precious one would scarcely have moved him. Then, under the alchemy of drowsiness, the vision of Sam turned into the picture of Marcia Hare, and then came sleep, profound and dreamless as it only comes to the young. Chapter 6. Miss Beeman. He was up at 8 o'clock next morning, was dressed, and out by 9. An hour too soon. At 9 o'clock London is seemingly awake, but with its eyes still closed. He walked from Sloane Square to Charing Cross and then on to Fleet Street, arriving at White Lion Court a few minutes after 10. Marcia had not arrived yet, but the senior partner, Miss Beeman, was there, a capable, middle-aged woman who received him and held him in talk till the arrival of the junior. Rose Beeman was one of those people who do not hang on formalities. She talked to Bobby as though she had known him all her life. She talked of his work and she talked of her partner. Marcia was killing herself with work. She was one of those conscientious people who slave themselves to death over detail. She had taken only a week's holiday that summer, and a month would not have been too much. "You see," said Miss Beeman, "it all depends on the person and where they were born. A born Londoner is different from a person brought up in the country. I have known Marcia since she was a child. We used to call her March Hare. She was so wild and such a tomboy. Now she is like a creature tamed and depressed by captivity. Cities are all wrong, it seems to me. Great prisons, workhouses, where the people are quite content, not because they ought to be content, but because they are subdued to their surroundings. Then the arrival of the discussed one broke off the conversation, and a minute later Bobby found himself tête-à-tête with her and trying to explain Berens's whole proposition in a few words. "He's backing me to the extent of £3,000, he finished at last, "and we are to divide the profits. And that brings me to what I want to say. You introduced me to this business, and of course your firm must have a share in it." The girl laughed. "I think we will discuss that," said she, "when we see how things turn out. There mightn't be anything to share. Then again, it's all very well to say we ought to share in the profits, but how about the work and the danger of the business? It was no trouble to me to give you an introduction to Mr. Berens. He asks you to take the matter up. You take all sorts of risks, and the work is sure to be hard. Why should we take a commission when we run no risks with you and do no work?" She spoke without animation, in a tired way. Here, in the full light of morning, Bobby began to perceive the truth of Miss Beeman's words. March Hare, the light-hearted creature of other days, pictured by Miss Beeman, was far from being suggested by this girl, fading in the air of Fleet Street, exhausted by office work and the struggle with editors, authors, clerks, typewriters, and all the gnomes and fiends that move behind the great set stage of Storyland. Bobby sometimes had luminous ideas. One came to him now. "Why not?" asked he. "Why not what?" asked she. "Share in the risks and the work. Take a holiday and come with us. I'm not joking. We'll only be a few months, and think of it." "Think of it," said Bobby, almost frightened at the daring of the proposal, which in the Victorian age would have caused him to be exterminated by an outraged parent or guardian, but which left Marcia Hare quite unshocked. She had indeed driven an ambulance in the Great War. "Think of it. There was never such an expedition before. Think of the fun and the excitement. Fishing. It beats fishing hollow. It's not fishing for fish, but for old gods and things. There's no knowing what we may get up out of that place. Think of the Greek islands. It's a regular town, streets and buildings, all covered with shallow water, clear as a diamond. Haelos is the name of it." "Don't," said the girl almost irritably. "How could I? I'm tied to my work. It's like holding out an apple to a donkey that's behind bars and can't reach it. Would I come? Of course I would come, if I were free. Miss Beeman said you were working yourself to death and that you wanted a long holiday. She'd let you free soon enough. Besides, you're a partner, aren't you? And it's business. You would have your commission on your share." "It's impossible," said Marcia. "There are too many things to be done here." "Leaving everything else aside," said he, "your brains would help to make the thing a success. I'm not a brainy person, at all events in that way. I'm always forgetting things. Well, say this at all events, say that you'll think of it." "I'm sure to do that," she answered with a sigh. "I mean as a business proposition. Promise me to think it over and try and find some way by which you may be able to come." "Yes, I'll do that, if you wish, but it's hopeless." "No, that's no use. Promise me that you will put the hopelessness aside and really think of it and try and find some way out. Think it out like a problem." "Very well, I will. Remember, you will be one of the expedition, so you'll have no expenses. Oh, promise me another thing." "What?" "That you'll talk the matter over with Miss Beeman." "But I thought it was to be kept a secret." "So it is. But Miss Beeman is safe." "Very well. I will talk to her about it." He looked at his watch. "Now I must be going. I have to catch the train to Bournemouth and get to Poole Harbour to see a man I know there who may be able to help me. May I come tomorrow and tell you how I am getting on?" "Yes, certainly," said Marcia, looking at the clock behind him. "Have you got your luggage with you, or will you have to go home to pack?" "Which luggage?" asked Bobby. "Well, a bag or something. You see, Poole is a good way from Bournemouth, and you mayn't be able to get back tonight. He hadn't thought of this. He had reckoned in a hazy way that he could be back by the evening. "There you are," said he. "I clean forgot all about that. You remember the first time I saw you? You said I was a forgetful person. I am. I'll just have to buy a toothbrush and a few things on the way to the station." Off he went, and the girl sat for a moment, looking at the morning correspondence before her on the desk, but gazing in reality at the mental picture of Bobby and his irresponsibility. She knew his character quite well by now, or so she thought. Anyhow, she knew pieces of it. Picking up the railway guide that lay on her desk, she followed the traveller in her mind. She found that the proper way to get to Poole is not to go to Bournemouth, but to Poole, direct. Chapter 7. Poole. He found this out later in the day at the cost of considerable time. Forgetfulness and carelessness as to details are not assets in the conduct of business dealings with a world that goes by timetable and is mostly inhabited by practical folk, to say nothing of sharks. It was after 4 o'clock when he reached his destination. The old quaint town of Poole stands by a natural harbour, all pockets and dents, and much used by fishing boats and various sailing craft. The tide here ebbs and flows twice in the 12 hours, and at low water the mud banks, the sand banks, and the slob lands emerge, or hint of themselves, beneath the swarms of chanting gulls. Bobby had bought a cheap attaché case, a toothbrush, and a suit of pyjamas on the way to the station. These he deposited at the Anchor Inn, whilst he started out to hunt for Samuel Hackett. The waiter at the Anchor knew of Sam, had seen him on the wharf that morning, and reckoned that he would be aboard his boat, which was anchored out towards Brownsea Island. On the wharf, Bobby fell in with an old longshore crab, who offered to take him out to muster Hackett's boat for 5 shillings. Bowler was his name, and on the row out Bobby, if he had listened, might have gathered not only the name of the oarsman, but his age and the age of his wife, the number of his children, the parlous state of Poole as a seaport, and the condition of the Christchurch salmon fishing. But he was not listening. The great harbour in the evening light, with Corfe Castle against the sunset, and the ring dotterels and curlews flighting around Brownsea Island, held his mind from all else. The sea marks rippling to the tide that was just beginning to ebb held his eye, and then the sandbanks at the mouth showed their gorse and yellow dunes as the boat drew up to a yawl, over the stern of which a man in a boatswain's chair was hanging, paintbrush in hand and busy at work. It was Hackett. "Hello!" cried Bobby as the boat drew up. "Mind my paint!" cried Hackett. "Bring her round to starboard. Good Lord, Bobby, where on earth have you sprung from?" "Come to pay you a visit about something important. Can I come aboard?" "Can you come on board?" "1 minute." He got on deck, threw down the ladder, and helped the visitor overside. Then he ordered Bowler to take the boat back. "But I've left my luggage at that inn place," said Bobby. "You don't want luggage here," said Sam. "I can give you all you want, and you can have the dinghy to go back in whenever you want to go. You can stay the night anyhow, can't you? This is the Sandfly. Ain't she a little beauty?" Bobby looked around him, at the narrow deck, the taut standing rigging, the neatly coiled ropes. He saw nothing beautiful, but he did not say so. She was a 10-tonner with a cockpit leading into a little cabin where the headroom was so low that Bobby had to stoop when standing. He sat down on a cushioned locker while Sam offered whiskey and a box of Burma cheroots, which he fetched down from a net shelf. Whilst he fussed about, the visitor looked around him. There was nothing here that could carry away in bad weather. Everything was plain but clean, and the only decorations were some photographs nailed to a bulkhead. Photographs of ships and small yachts. The ruling passion. "How long have you had her?" asked Bobby, referring to the Sandfly. "Got her the season before last," replied Sam, soda siphon in hand. "Say when." "Got her at Cowes. Her only fault is, she's a wet boat, but you can't have everything unless you have money." "Ever been a long distance in her?" "Only to Cherbourg and Boulogne. She's too small for long cruising with comfort. That seat easy." "Quite. Look here, Sam. I've come down to you about a thing, one of the biggest things I've ever struck, What sized boat would you want for a cruise to the Mediterranean? A deep-sea expedition to the Greek islands, taking a diver and all his traps, and 5 or 6 for a crew? What on earth would you want with a diver? Never mind that. I'll tell you in a minute. What I want to know first is the size of the boat. Well, said Sam, a 40 or 50 tonner would be best, ketch or yawl rigged for choice, and a good seaboat. The Mediterranean is the devil sometimes. But why do you ask? I'll tell you, Sam, if you'll swear on the soles of your boots never to let it out. I can trust you, can't I? I never talk. Well, it's this way. Bobby, leaning forward, began his story. Sure of his man, he told everything from start to finish, and Sam, curled up on the opposite side of the table, his old pipe in his mouth, absorbed the tale. But the romantic part of it seemed to leave him quite unmoved. The town under the sea, the treasures of art to be recovered from it, the dangers of the expedition, all these were nothing to Samuel Hackett. You'd want a 40-tonner at least, said he when the story was over. Auxiliary engined, yawl for choice. You'd want a boat for the diving pump and a dinghy. What's this you said? Statues and things. Well, statues are pretty heavy, ain't they? Well, you might use the anchor winch or rig a tackle for getting them up, but you'd want storage room. What are you prepared to spend? Well, how much do you think a boat like that would cost? Oh, 800 to 1,000. Do you know of any boat that would do? Sam fell into a reverie. Well, if you're not particular as to appearances, said he, there's the Lorna Dune. She's alongside the wharf at Poole now. Ketch over 40 ton. Just been remastered and the hull's as sound as I am. Purbeck, the chap that owns her, had her fitted out for cruising and only used her once this season because of the masts, but they are right enough now. He's been hit on the stock exchange, and I believe he'd sell. He picked her up cheap. She'd do if she's sound. Sam, look here. Supposing I could get her, or some other boat as good, will you come along and lend a hand? Me? Yes, you. It'll be no end of fun, and I'll make it worth your while. I'm on my beam ends. I know next to nothing about this sea business, and you're an expert. No, said Sam. I couldn't go. I can't leave the boat. But why on earth can't you? Oh, I've a lot of repairs to do to her this winter. You don't know what a boat requires in that way. There's no end to be done to her, but I'll help you in any other way I can. I can get you the men you want, and see you right about stores and all that. I can get you Glastonbury, the chief diver of the Poole Construction Board, or was till he quarrelled with them last June. He'd take on a winter job down south. But I don't want a man who will talk. Glastonbury isn't a man. He's a diving machine, replied Hackett. And now come along and help me to get dinner ready. In a microscopic galley forward of the hole where the sleeping bunks were, Sam produced eggs from a basket and 8 slices of raw bacon wrapped in the financial page of the Times. There'll be enough for dinner tonight and breakfast tomorrow morning, said Sam. I'd have got beefsteak if I'd known you were coming. Hold on to this whilst I light the stove. The stove smoked and stank. The place became filled with the lee-shore sound of frying bacon, a sound as of waves tearing the shrieking shale to their hearts, above which came the shouting of Sam, giving directions as to the laying of the table in the cabin and the gash-gash of eggs being sacrificed. You'll find the knives and forks in the starboard afterlocker. And the cloth, cried Sam. And the cups. We'll have coffee. I'll fetch the bread along. Then, as they dined, a rising breeze dispelling the perfume of paraffin and filling the cabin with delicious harbour scents and voices of guillemots and tern, shell ducks and dotterel from the emerging mudbanks and sandpits, Sam took up the theme of the Lorna Dune and the voyage down south. Bobby noticed that he seemed more enthusiastic over the business than he had been an hour before. The thing had evidently sunk into his mind, arousing all the passions of the small yachtsman who is never so happy as when he is fitting out and fiddling over gadgets. He talked of the Lorna Dune with enthusiasm. She had an auxiliary engine, it seemed, and a propeller shaft piercing the port quarter. The propeller, he explained, was not directly behind the rudder, as in a steamer, but sticking out at an angle. It was a patent propeller that opened out like an umbrella when revolving and closed up when not in use. She had water tanks capable of holding 500 gallons. She had beautiful sleeping accommodation, a cabin aft of the main cabin, and a bathroom. "But you'll see her tomorrow," said Sam. "I'll row you over after breakfast, and we'll find Purbeck at the inn." They sat on deck after dinner, smoking and watching the lights of Poole and the lights on the sandpit, talking but little, for everything that Sam had ever learned at Oxford or London or from life in general seemed to have been ousted for a general cargo of seacraft lore, ranging from the question of main sheet buffers to the burning subject of water ballast as a substitute for metal. Then they turned in. Chapter 8. The Purchase of the Lorna Dune. Bobby was awakened by a lamenting voice, or rather, chorus, the gulls. He came on deck to find the sun pushing up from behind the sandspit. Black and white sheldrakes were fishing round the sandfly, and a flock of curlews showed, making a way towards the trough of Poole. Breakfast was over by 8, and half an hour later, rowed by Sam, they were landing at the wharf where the Lorna Dune was moored, a white-painted, broad-beamed ketch of some 45 or 50 tons, new-masted, as one could easily see, and with the Poole Yacht Club flag at her jackstaff. All the same, and despite her new paint, new masts, and gaily fluttering flag, she did not look it. Did not look the yacht her owner made her out to be. Her builders had never meant her to play this part. They had meant her for trawling, for beating against North Sea weather, for carrying tons of fish and discharging them on Grimsby wharves, maybe even for the Icelandic banks and the seas off Flugaska. A plain workwoman in silks and satin and a diamond tiara. That is what she looked like. But Sam said her heart was good. From the wharf they dropped onto her deck, where a shipkeeper received them. "Mr. Purbeck ain't down yet," said the man, "but he won't have no objection to you looking over her. Thinking of buying, are you? Well, you might do worse. Purbeck ain't down yet. Been celebrating at the inn till Lord knows what o'clock with some of them young chaps from the club. Mighty free he is with his money to everyone, but those that serve him. £1 a week is good enough for the likes of me, and him cutting and shining ashore, champagne corks popping like guns and cigars as big as your leg, and—" "Jim," said Hackett, seized with a sudden brainwave, "do you want to earn £0.50?" "Spit it out," said Jim. "What did Purbeck pay for her?" "350, replied Jim, "and the masts and stand-in rigging and paint cost him another 100. Cough up your £0.50. The money changed hands and they went below. Yes, everything was as Hackett had said. A comfortable cabin with an after cabin, a sleeping cabin leading forward to a galley, a forecastle, a bathroom, metal ballast, and a general appearance of solidity and soundness that appealed even to the inexperienced eyes of Bobby. On deck it was the same, from the anchor winch to the wheel. "Now," said Sam, as they scrambled onto the wharf, "we'll go and see Purbeck. You ought to get her for 500, or 6 at the most. He wants to sell, and the winter is before him, and there aren't many buyers about, not for a boat like her. I'll do the business for you, and you keep your mouth shut." They found Purbeck at breakfast at the inn, a stout and red-faced individual with small blue eyes and a blue serge coat with brass buttons on it. Sam knew him. "Hello, Purbeck," said Sam, ringing the coffee-room bell. "Didn't know you were here. I've just been looking at that boat of yours. 2 glasses of beer," to the waiter who had answered the bell. "A friend of mine is wanting a boat. Are you selling?" "That depends," said Purbeck. "I'd thought of selling, but to tell you the truth, I've scarcely the heart to. I'm used to her. There's nothing to touch her on the coast, and I've made arrangements to lay her up for the winter by Nicholson's yard." "Well, she's a bit too small anyhow," said Sam. "You don't by chance happen to know of a boat a wee bit bigger, yawl for choice? By the way, what were you thinking of asking for her when you thought of selling, if it's not a rude question?" 1,200, said Purbeck. 1,200? Oh, that's no use to us, even if she was big enough. 55 is what we thought of. This is Mr. Lestrange. He's the man who wants to buy, but he can't afford big money. Why, laying her up for the winter will knock a lot off her value. It's not as if you were selling at the beginning of the season. But, of course, that's your affair. Then began a long conversation on the question of laying a yacht up for the winter, and Bobby, as he sat listening to these two yachting toughs maneuvering for a stranglehold, thought the deal off. But it wasn't, by any means. Slowly and by degrees they got down to tin tacks and prices, Sam shamelessly dropping the question of the boat being too small, and Purbeck, robed in the garb of the hypothetical, suggesting prices that he might accept were he disposed by any chance to enter on a deal. Bobby left them at it and went out to smoke a pipe. Half an hour later Sam joined him, flushed under his tan and exhausted. "He'll take 700, said Sam. "I can't beat him down a penny more. 700 as she stands, without anything taken off her, and ready for sea. Everything in the sail room, the galley as it stands, and the cabins, bunk bedding, everything." "Would you advise me to close?" asked Bobby. "I would. You won't do better and might do a lot worse. She's a sound boat, and you can sell her when you've done with her." "Well, I hadn't thought of that before. That makes it easier. You see, Sam, I'm dealing in this matter with old Baron's money, not my own, and I have to go carefully. You're sure she's big enough for Mediterranean work?" "Oh, gosh, yes." "Then I'll close. Baron's will send him the cheque tomorrow." They went back to the inn and concluded matters with Purbeck, who would make out all the necessary papers and hand them over to Sam on receipt of the cheque. Then Bobby collected his traps and made for the station, Hackett accompanying him. The soul of Sam seemed upraised by the triumphant conclusion of the deal. It was more. It was trapped, entangled, snared like a rabbit by the sticks and strings of the Lorna Dune. She had taken possession of him just as a woman takes possession of a man, and his love for the sandfly was under eclipse. He was married to the sandfly, and up to last night he had been quite happy with her, but this morning had made all the difference. He had gone over the Lorna with the eyes of a prospective buyer, approved of her, and finally bargained for her. It is true he had bargained for her on behalf of another man. That made no difference. The act had somehow tied him and her together. He was already beginning to dream of the contents of her sailroom, asking himself how she would go under a spinnaker, telling himself that he had been blind to her up to this, that her lines of strength were in reality lines of beauty, the only beauty worth having. And only a week ago he had called her a tub. It was the beginning of the sort of thing that leads a man into the divorce court. Tomorrow he would be telling himself that the sandfly was a soap dish, a toy, a woman's boat. Bobby, in some subtle and extraordinary manner, sensed something of this as they stood together at the station, waiting for the London train that was to take him to town. "Well," said he, "it's good of you to have taken all this trouble, and to promise to help in getting me my crew. But there's one thing I do wish, and that is that you were going with us in command." "How do you mean in command?" "I mean, if you had thought of going with us, I'd have asked you to take charge. You'd have been captain. But I suppose it's not to be. Anyhow, you'll give a hand, won't you, in getting things together? And when the business is finished with Purbeck, I give you carte blanche to go over and see what's wanted, and make any alterations or improvements if it won't take too much of your time." "I'll give an eye to her," said Sam. "Make your mind easy. And take it from me, you've got a boat that won't let you down. I'll have her dry docked at Matheson's and go over the copper, and I'll let you know anything that's wanted. Don't bother about the crew and all that. I'll see to everything." Then the train came in, and Bobby went off, and Samuel Hackett, slowly retracing his steps to the inn, had a glass of beer, lit his pipe, and returned to the wharf side, standing with his hands in his pockets and his eyes fixed in contemplation on the new boat that had come into his life. The boat that yesterday had been nothing to him. Blind, blind he had been, yet blind chiefly because she was above the tonnage that he had been accustomed to. She was too big to work single-handed. He got into his dinghy and returned to the Sandfly, tied up and came on board, got the paint and brush, and went on with the interrupted business of yesterday. But it was no longer entirely a labour of love. His mind was elsewhere, pleasantly occupied, yet uneasy. Chapter 9. Marcia. In the train, the purchaser of the Lorna Dune began to have misgivings. He had agreed to pay £700 for the boat, and now, away from the small yacht atmosphere of Poole and beyond the magnetism of Hackett, the amount seemed enormous and out of all proportion to the size of the purchase. £700, and that was only the start, the first day's work, so to speak. Almost a third of the money at his disposal gone at one blow. What would Behrens say? At Victoria, he took a taxi and drove to Museum Street, where he found the art dealer in his shop looking over a case of Cosway miniatures he had just purchased. "Good day," said the old man, as Bobby came towards him past the showcase and suits of armour. "Come and look at my beauties. £1,700 they have cost me. Well, what news of our expedition?" "It has cost you 700 already," said Bobby, "but I believe the thing is half done." Then he told. Behrens did not seem at all alarmed at the tale. "This Mr. Hackett is an expert in his way," said he. "The best man in England," replied Bobby. "Well, there you are. You have begun well by choosing a good man. Napoleon's battles were all won, not by Napoleon, but by the men he chose to win them. This Mr. Hackett, you say, will choose your crew and your captain? That is as it should be. And when do you think you can get away?" "Hackett said we ought to be out in a fortnight." "That is better still. You have done well. And do not trouble too much about the expense. The boat will be insured, and on her return she will be saleable. I do not know anything of boats, but I do of prices in general, and I reckon she will sell for half what she cost." "Oh, more than that." "No matter. I put it at half. So already we have spent only £350. Now to another matter. I have seen our friend Miss Hare." "Yes?" "She called upon me yesterday. As I told you, I have known her from childhood. She is a good girl, good in all ways. Did you know that she was engaged to Isaac?" "To your son?" "Yes, to my son. He who discovered Haelos, and for whose sake and to whose memory I am financing this expedition. I speak sentimentally. I hope to make a large profit out of it for myself and for you, but in my heart of hearts the memory of my Isaac stirs and gives colour to the whole thing. He so wished that I should profit from it." The old man leaned on the case of cameos and seemed for a moment to forget his hearer, who stood without speaking, scarcely heeding the naive confession about profit, engrossed by this new fact. Marcia Hare had been engaged to Isaac Behrens, had loved him, without doubt, and without doubt loved him still. He knew now the reason of the faraway look of sadness that had come into her face when she told him about the death of Isaac. It was as though a ghost had suddenly come between himself and this girl who had been living in his thoughts ever since he first met her. She had been one of his chief inspirations in this business. She had got into his heart, but he had not known how much he really cared for her till now. "She called on me yesterday," went on Behrens, knowing nothing of what was passing in the other's mind. "She told me you had asked her to join in this expedition, and that she had told you it was impossible, that she could not by any means leave her work. Then, as she told me, that she began to cry. Women are women. I said to her, 'Marcia, you want to go with this expedition to Haelos, to see the wonder that poor Isaac discovered and on which he set his heart?' She said, 'Yes,' and I said, 'You shall go, work or no work. You shall go even if I have to pay Miss Beeman, your partner, for any loss that may be sustained by the business during your absence. But there will be no loss. I am an old businessman, and I know that businesses have a habit of carrying on, even though one of the partners be taken away. You shall see Isaac's city. Women are strange people. It was the one desire of her heart to go, yet she fought against the idea till I prevailed. I called a cab, and leaving this place in charge of my man, I took her to Miss Beeman, who made no difficulty about the matter. Indeed, she was entirely with me. So the thing is settled, if you think the boat you have chosen will not expose her to too great hardships." "I had her in mind when I was looking over the boat," said Bobby. "I had made her promise to think about coming with us. The boat is all right. There is plenty of accommodation, and an after cabin she can have. When I asked her, one of the things that prompted me was the fact that she was looking dog-tired and in need of a change. Of course, I have only known her a short time, but that was how it seemed to me. She's one of the people who work themselves to death, and she's one of the people who were made, it seems to me, for the open air, not a stuffy office. Of course, the Lorna Dune is small, but Hackett says she's safe, and that one could go round the world in her. But I can explain all that to Miss Hare, and I will call on her tomorrow, first thing. Do so, said Behrens, and let me know all about it. Now to business. I will send that cheque tonight to your friend Hackett. The purchase papers will be made out in my name. It is just as well. And you? Have you enough money to carry on with? Plenty. You will keep an account of your expenses and let me have the bill? Yes. Then, said Behrens, that closes the matter for the present. Keep me informed how things go from day to day. I am always in at night, and there is always a cup of coffee awaiting you. Then Bobby found himself in the street. It was 10 minutes to 3. He had plenty of time to reach White Lion Court and see Marcia before the office closed, but something held him back. The idea of Isaac Behrens. His feeling towards Marcia had not altered, but something had pushed her away from him ever so little. He wanted time to accommodate himself to the new fact that she had been in love with another man, that she loved his memory still, and that if she went on this expedition, her main reason for going would be to visit the place Isaac had discovered and to help in realizing his dream. You cannot be jealous of a dead man, yet a dead man may stand between you and the woman you care for. Bobby understood this fact for the first time in his life as he came along New Oxford Street, making towards Oxford Circus. By the time he reached the circus, his mind had settled down and become clear. His plan was made. He would dismiss from his thoughts all things other than the expedition and its needs till the affair was over. Marcia was coming with him, well and good. She would be one of the party, nothing more. Love had nothing to do with a business like this. It had to be cut clean out. After everything was over, things might be different, but till everything was over and success grasped, hard work would be the order of the day. Hard work, attention to detail, watchfulness, and unswerving determination. Those were the 4 essentials. Chapter 10. Deep Sea Gear. He put his hand to his breast pocket and drew out the envelope on the back of which Sam had scribbled the address of the Deep Sea Diving Outfit Company, the great firm that supplies all the pearl fisheries of the world with their diving equipment, to say nothing of the harbour boards. Truly, Behrens was right when he spoke of the importance of men and the importance of being able to choose men, for Bobby might have been days wandering about on this diving dress business and gone, perhaps, to some second-hand dealer, but for Hackett. There is one thing you must not skimp money over, and that is diving equipment. He reached Bermondsey at 10 minutes to 4 o'clock, and at 4 found himself at the works, which are situated in the Grange Road. By 5 o'clock he had made his purchases: a 3-cylinder air pump, a helmet and gunmetal corselet, 2 diving dresses of bark-tanned twilled cloth, 3 50-feet lengths of rubber floating air hose tested to 250 pounds to the square inch, boots, signal line, lead weights, special underclothing, and all sorts of sundries from spare helmet glasses to wrist rings. The total cost under £150, also packing cases. The whole to be packed and dispatched to him on board the Lorna Dune at Miller's Quay, Poole, Dorset. Then he came west, well satisfied with his day's work, dined at a restaurant, went home and fell asleep, waking next morning to find a letter from Hackett sent by the last post from Bournemouth. Sam's handwriting, despite his public school and Oxford education, was that of a schoolboy, but the letter itself was full of fire and passion. It might have been the letter of a lover describing his mistress. "When I left you," wrote Sam, "I went back to the Sandfly and tinkered about, but I couldn't help going back to the Lorna and having a look round. What possessed Purbeck to part with her I don't know. Jim was off her, so I had her to myself. You can't get at the innards of a boat unless you're alone on her, with no one to bother and take one's mind off business. Of course, I knew she was good when I recommended you to buy, but I did not know how good she was. There's not a square inch of dry rot anywhere. How could there be? It's all teak, And though she was built somewhere before the war, she's better than new. The auxiliary engine wants nothing done to it, and the sails in the sail room are in good condition. But there's no trysail. We must have a trysail. That brute Purbeck mishandled her. Nothing much, but coming in last time he touched on the West Point sandspit, and she wants a new bobstay. He must have been drunk. Adams, one of the crew he had, told me of it this afternoon. Well, no more at present. Yours, Sam Hackett. P.S. I have thought of the men we'll want for a crew, and I believe I've got you a skipper. The last 8 words were heavily underlined. Bobby laughed as he put the letter back in its envelope and started to dress. Sam must evidently have sent a special messenger or gone himself to Bournemouth to get it off by the last post. He was keen as paint, and his keenness had been born of his sudden love for the Lorna Dune. From half a lifetime's study of small yachtsmen, I can say that cases like that of Sam are not uncommon. I have seen a man making a fool of himself over a boat, waste his money over her clothes in the form of sails, and her jewellery in the form of extra patent, sure to stick at the last moment gadgets, only to be let down by her in a squall off the Needles because she was not honest. I have seen a boat come between a man and his wife, and have seen a triangle of a man and a girl and a boat, and the girl get the worst of it. Sam had dreamt of the Lorna Dune, and after an early breakfast he was on board her making notes of things that required looking to at the same time that Bobby, having left his rooms, was making for White Lion Court. He found Marcia just arrived at the office. It was as though she had turned into another person. The look of tiredness had gone from her. She had more colour. Her eyes were brighter, and she laughed as she greeted him. "I'm coming," said Marcia. "I never thought I could do it, but Mr. Behrens has taken things in hand. He's making me go. Not that I wanted much making, but still, he's settled things." "I know," said Bobby. "I saw him, and he told me, and I've got the boat." He explained, telling how by good luck he had got a man to look after things and find not only the boat, but a crew. "What's his name?" asked Marcia. "Hackett. He was up with me at Oxford. He's an awfully good chap, and what he doesn't know about boats isn't worth knowing." "Is his other name Samuel?" "Yes." "Oh. Do you know him?" "I knew a Samuel Hackett once, but I don't suppose it's the same." "And it doesn't matter," replied Marcia. "And now, go on and tell me. You've got the boat and the crew. How many men are there in the crew?" "I don't know. Sam will see to all that." "And a captain, for you don't know anything about sailing a boat, do you?" "How do you know that?" "I didn't. I only guessed." "Well, I don't know much, as a matter of fact. But Sam will get us a captain." "And stores and things." "Oh, Sam. I mean, we'll see to that," replied Bobby, sick of Sam, and the fact that Sam was really, and as far as things had gone, running this expedition. "I've got the diving rig out." "You have been busy. Where did you get it?" "Place in Bermondsey." He had forgotten the name, and he took from his breast pocket the envelope on the back of which Hackett had penciled the name. The envelope was addressed in a large, clear hand to S. Hackett, Esquire, the yacht Sandfly, Poole. He saw that she had taken in the fact. "Sam gave it to me," said he, as he put the envelope back in his pocket. "And now, tell me, would you be ready to start in a fortnight if we have the boat and everything ready?" "I could start tomorrow," said Marcia. "Well, we'll hurry up things. You'll like the boat. There's a cabin aft you can have, and the main cabin is large and comfortable, and there's a bathroom. The only bother is the bay, if we have rough weather." "Oh, I don't mind weather," said Marcia. "I'm never ill." "I only thought if you cared to escape the bay, you might go overland to Marseille and pick us up there." "In a stuffy French train? Never. No, I'll be ready to start whenever you are. Are you going back to Poole?" "Yes, today, after seeing Behrens. I've done everything I want in London, and I'll stick down there till we start. Meanwhile, I'll keep you informed as to how we are getting on." She accompanied him through the outer office to the top of the stairs to say goodbye, and then he found himself in Fleet Street, making for Behrens. He felt dissatisfied and a bit upset. Bobby was always finding out unsatisfactory things about himself, which is a hopeful sign in a young man. He had started from home that morning quite satisfied with himself and the world, feeling, in fact, that he had acted pretty smartly in this affair and had overcome difficulties that would have floored many another man. Then, all of a sudden, in his interview with Marcia, yet without a word from her, he had discovered that he had done next to nothing, that Hackett had done the whole business, and that he, Bobby, had only acted the part of a marionette. Also, he felt vaguely that right from the start he had been the pawn, not the player, the moved one, not the mover. Marcia had introduced him to Behrens. Behrens had put him into the affair. Hackett was practically running it. So he thought, quite forgetting that the real hook upon which everything hung was his own act in closing at once on Behrens' offer. That act showed courage and determination and daring, the three things that make a man, even though he be wanting in nearly everything else. He did not see this. He felt cheap. And in the omnibus that took him to Museum Street, another thing troubled him. What did Marcia know of Hackett? Why did she drop the subject so quickly? Evidently she had known him in the past. Had there been anything between them? He got out at Oxford Circus and walked to Behrens, carrying with him this riddle unsolved. Chapter 11. The Crew of Blind Men. During the next 10 days, Bobby Lestrange was busy doing things under the orders of Sam. They camped in the Sandfly, and to the labours incident on the fitting out of the Lorna Dune were added the labours of cooking their own food and washing up. Bobby wanted to stop at the inn, but Sam would have none of that. "You've got to get used to a boat," said Sam, "and you'll be thanking me before you've got through the gut of Gibraltar." They had to take the auxiliary engine down, examine it in all its parts, put it together again, and run it. They had to renew several ratlines that were doubtful, fit a new mainsheet buffer and bobstay, and devise a boom to carry a watch tackle necessary for their work at Haelos. They had to look to the ballast, fill the water tanks with 500 gallons of water, make out the list of stores, receive them, and stow them. Whenever Bobby ventured to ask about the crew and captain, Sam made the same reply. "That's all right. Leave it to me." But on the evening of the 10th day, as they sat smoking after supper, he broke the silence. "Everything is ready to put out the day after tomorrow," said he, "and I propose to get the crew to sign on tomorrow. I've got 4 chaps, not including Glastonbury, the diver, and they're all blind and dumb." "Good Lord," said Bobby. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking sense. You said you want men who won't come home and chatter about what you are doing. These chaps won't. First, there's Glastonbury. He never talks about anything. He's a diver and nothing else. Silent as a seal when he's out of the water, same as when he's in. Then there's Bowler, brother of that longshoreman who rowed you off first day you were here. He's a Christchurch man whose one idea is the salmon fishing. His head wouldn't hold 2 ideas. Then there's Longley, Church, and Atherfield. They are all small yacht sailors out of jobs. I know them all, and the whole crowd are blind. Not the way you mean, but the way I mean. They take no interest in anything but their grub and their pay, and the sea qualities of the boat they are in. You say you expect to fish up Greek statues and things. Well, if you were to fish up the great god Pan, alive and kicking, you wouldn't interest these chaps. They are blind to everything but just the things that matter to them, and it's only those things they talk about. Now, a deep-sea sailor is different. There's a lot of intellect of sorts in a forecastle. They are always talking in the forecastle, and a lot of them read books. But this longshore crowd is different." "I see," said Bobby. "But how about the skipper?" Sam laughed. "I've been looking round for a skipper," said he. "It has given me an awful lot of trouble to make a decision, but I've got one." "Where is he?" "Here," replied Sam, "and he won't cost you anything but his grub." "Do you mean to say you'll come yourself?" "Unless you have any objection. I can't keep off it. It's not me, it's the Lorna. She's got me in her grip. I've never had her out, but I know she's good. Lines can't lie." "Well, that's the best news you've given me yet," said Bobby. "I've always been funky of a skipper. Some chap that would, maybe, barge in with objections to what we were doing, or maybe try to grab a big share in the deal. But Sam, you aren't going for nothing. You've got to have a pull out of it some way. I've money enough of my own, said Sam, and I'm going for my own fun. I don't take any interest in your archaeological business. You can fish up what you dashed, well please, so long as you don't bother me to admire it or hand me out any mythological junk. Well, that's settled, isn't it? Yes, said Bobby. Suddenly into his mind had come Marcia Hare. He had never told Sam that a girl was to be one of the party, simply because he had never looked on Sam as having anything to do with the business except as regards the outfitting. He remembered Marcia's inquiry about Sam, and then how she had closed up as though the subject were distasteful to her. Heavens, if there had been anything between these two, anything that would make one not want to sail with the other, what a complication would ensue. I didn't tell you, said he, but there's a girl going. Going where? Going with us. A girl? But for heaven's sake, man, what are you taking a girl along on an expedition like this for? She's not a girl of the ordinary sort. She's ready to rough it and lend a hand. She told me she could do cooking. Who is she? She's a friend of Baron's. He's known her since she was a child, and she's not strong and wants a change. She's my literary agent, and she introduced me to Baron's, and but for her, this affair would never have come off. He spoke hurriedly, keeping back the name and hoping Sam would forget to ask it. There might be nothing in his fears, but it was just as well to risk nothing. The expedition was due off the day after next at the first of the ebb, that is to say, 6 o'clock in the morning. Marcia would not come down till the night before, and there would be no time for Sam to kick, even if he wanted to. Bobby did not take into account the possibility that there might be some deep misunderstanding or family feud between these two people, making it impossible for them to be messmates. His whole suspicions were based only on the manner of the girl when she closed her inquiries as to Sam. There might be nothing in it. He determined to leave it at that and keep dumb until the critical moment, unless Sam pressed him. But Sam was not bothering about the name of this girl who had suddenly been foisted on him and would be sure to want the after cabin, which he had mentally reserved for himself as skipper. Sam was not the sort of skipper who sleeps in the chart room to oblige a lady. He looked on women as a bore and a nuisance in the main business of life, that is to say, small yachting, and his back now was all bristles. "We've got cooks," he said. "Bowler and Church will take it in turns, and it doesn't seem the thing, taking a girl on a show like this with nothing but men on board." He was perfectly honest in saying this. Sam was Victorian in a lot of ways, a fact that was no discredit to him, however it might limit his ideas or the range of woman's activities. "She's driven an ambulance in the war," said Bobby, "and she's the sort of girl who could go anywhere. Doesn't make you feel as if she was a girl, you know." "All the same," said Sam, "she's outside this job. It's absurd. You are going on an important and risky business, and you take a delicate girl along for her health. You said she was delicate. You'll be wanting to take a cow next, I suppose, so that she can have fresh milk every morning. And I suppose she will be wanting the after cabin." "Yes, of course, but the bunks in the sleeping cabin are quite comfortable. You told me that yourself. And there's only you and me, so we won't be crowded." "I know, but I reckoned on the after cabin as skipper. I reckoned to keep my charts and things there." "Well, keep the after cabin," said Bobby. "Let her bunk in the sleeping cabin, and I'll shake down in the galley. I don't mind." "That's clear nonsense," said the other. "If she comes, she'll have to have the best, naturally. I may be old-fashioned, thank heaven I am, but I have a feeling of respect for women. I suppose it's a part of my make-up. A woman's a woman. All the same, they're a dashed lot of nuisances." He tapped his pipe out, and the conversation dropped. An hour later, when they had turned in and the sandfly, moving to the tide ripples, was rocking them to sleep, Sam's voice came through the darkness. "What did you say that girl's name was?" "Which girl's name?" "The girl who's coming on this show." "Hare." "What's her other name?" "Which other name?" "Her Christian name." "March." "March Hare? Who on earth ever labelled a girl with a name like that?" "I don't know. Girls are called after the names of months, May, and so on. Why not March? He heard the other snorting and turning in his bunk, and then the even breathing that proclaimed sleep. But Bobby could not sleep for a long time. Why was Sam so anxious to know the other name? Had he done wrong in not telling him the truth? Might Sam and she have been in love with each other once, or anything like that? He remembered with relief that she had been in love with Isaac Behrens and engaged to him. Still, who could tell how many love affairs and engagements she might have had? On this question, which had no answer, he fell asleep. Chapter 12. Marcia's Secret. Marcia had a terrible secret, a secret known only to her mother and herself, a secret only half guessed by Behrens. In the war, whilst she had been driving an ambulance, the disaster had occurred which still overshadowed her life. There are disasters that finish themselves and everything round them, like a bursting shell in a moment of time. And there are disasters that, having done their work, go on living like horrible reptiles, ruining the lives of their victims, and of their victims' children and grandchildren. The Hares before the war had been very well-to-do, drawing some 6,000 a year from a business in Birmingham that seemed solid as the town hall itself. It tottered under the new condition of things, fell and went to smithereens, leaving Richard Hare dead amidst the ruins with a pistol bullet in his heart, leaving also his wife, Marcia, and his youngest daughter, Violet, almost unprovided for. Mrs. Hare had £150 a year of her own, Violet obtained the post of companion to a woman of means, and Marcia joined with Miss Beeman as working partner in the agency. The money she made was just sufficient to maintain herself whilst helping her mother, and in making it, she had nearly ruined her health. For several years she had not taken a proper holiday, and on top of everything was the fact of Isaac Behrens' death. It was old Jacob Behrens who had forced her hand, made her see that work without health was impossible, promised to keep an eye on her mother should any accident happen to the expedition, and by pure willpower made her accept £100 for an outfit and expenses to be repaid some day. Should the affair be successful, there will be much money in it, said Jacob. It is a business affair, pure and simple. Leaving everything else aside, I wish you to go as a person who has a knowledge of business and common sense. I trust Mr. Lestrange completely, but he is younger than his years and has not seen much of the world. I have great faith, too, in a woman's intuition. I owed much of my early success to my wife, Sarah. She, with her clear sight, often saved me from rogues and from my own stupidity. So you see, you will be killing all sorts of birds with the one stone, getting back your health, establishing the business, helping to look after old Jacob's affairs, and helping him to make money, of which you shall have your share. Also, Isaac would have wished it. Also, I believe you will bring luck. He came on the evening of her departure to see her off by the 6:30 train from Waterloo, buying her a first-class ticket and entrusting her with the ship's money, some £800 to hand to Bobby. Then, as the train glided out of the station and she sat in the corner of the comfortable first-class carriage she had to herself, a sense of relief and release came to her such as she had never before experienced. Gone were the cares of the office and the weariness and worries of life, Fleet Street and White Lion Court, journeys in omnibuses to save shillings, and all the petty and mean details that make up the life of the poor. Not the poor of the slums, but the poor of the middle classes, who have to keep up an appearance on insufficient means. She was free, free as a bird. Tomorrow she would not awake to breakfast in a hurry and catch the train from Hampstead to the city, there to spend the day wrestling with other people's affairs, returning at night wearied out, or going to a theatre she would be too tired to enjoy. All that was over, for the present at least. Life had turned over for her an entirely fresh page, all the more charming because it was unwritten upon. Marcia had no illusions about Jacob Behrens. She knew him to be a good man, but she knew that he was also a trader whose business followed him everywhere and whose business it was to make money. She knew that he was really in earnest in urging her to take up this affair for the benefit of her health, knowing as he did that what she wanted was not only change of air, but excitement and an absolutely new environment. But she also knew that his keenness in this matter had been whetted by his estimate of Bobby as a person excellent in every way, but as a businessman. So this new blank page that life had turned over for her had the additional attraction that the writing on it would be partly hers in the success or failure of the expedition which it would record. The express drew into Poole station at 9:08, and the first person she saw on the lamplit platform was Bobby. He helped her to get her small luggage from the carriage and her trunk from the van. Then, followed by a porter wheeling the lot, they started on foot for the inn. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Everything. The crew's on board, stores, water, and everything. We swung her today to test the compass, and we are due out at sunrise. I've got a room for you at the inn for tonight, and they'll wake you up in time tomorrow morning so that you can settle down and get your gear stowed before we start. Hackett is coming along as skipper." "Oh, he's the best man we could possibly have, and he's coming just for the fun of the thing." "Are you sure he is responsible?" "Quite." Here was a relief. Evidently, she had no objection to Sam, whatever she may have known of him before this. As he led the way into the coffee room of the Anchor, they met Hackett, who was just coming out. He had shaved off his beard and looked like the old Sam again. Bobby introduced him to the girl and watched as they shook hands. Yes, without any manner of doubt, these two had met before. He could tell by their manner, by their faces, by the way they shook hands. Yet not one word did they say in confirmation of the evident fact. Then, after a few commonplace remarks about the weather and the time of starting in the morning, Sam went off to the boat, where, having seen the girl comfortably settled at the inn, Bobby followed him, found him on deck, and, unable to restrain his curiosity, asked him the question right out. "Sam," said Bobby, "have you met that girl before?" "Yes," replied Sam, "and if it's all the same to you, I'd rather not talk about it." "I don't want to talk about it or pry into your affairs. It's only just this. When you asked me her other name, I told you the nickname she was known by as a child. I did so because, well, it doesn't matter. But I've only just thought that if there has been any unpleasantness between you and her, I was maybe wrong, and—" "There has been no unpleasantness," cut in the other. "And if it's all the same to you, we'll say no more on the subject." "All right," said Bobby. "We'll leave it at that." He went below and turned in and lay awake for an hour revolving in his mind the problem of it all. What in the name of common sense could have happened between these two to make them, having known each other, meet like strangers? Sam had evidently done nothing wrong, or Marcia would have refused to sail with him. And Marcia couldn't have done anything wrong. Had they cared for one another in the past and quarrelled? No, their manner did not point to that, and Marcia, when he told her that Sam was coming along with them, had shown little surprise and no sign of hesitation. Chapter 13. The Start. Marcia was awakened by the maid of the Anchor opening the bedroom door and turning on the light. It was still dark outside. The sun would not rise for another half an hour or more, and this hurried dressing by lamplight, in order to catch the tide, and a little boat that would take her to distant and unknown places, was the weirdest experience that had yet befallen Marcia. It was the same when she found herself outside the inn, with Bowler carrying her small baggage and making for the quay, against which no big steamer was moored. Bowler with the luggage, the smell of the harbour, the quay, all called up journeys to the continent from Dover or Folkestone, but here there was no mail boat to receive her, the night, no great funnels belching smoke, no crowd, nothing but the stick-like masts of the Lorna Dune against the fading night, and a lantern moving furtively by the quay edge. There was no need for secrecy or concealment, at least at present. The Lorna's papers were in order, and it was only a question of getting out. All the same, there was a suggestion of a hurried and surreptitious departure, not without its charm, in that atmosphere of night and sea scents and sounds. It was full flood, and the old quay gangplank used for excursion boats had been rigged leading to the deck of the Lorna, raised by the tide almost to the quay level. Marcia crossed the plank and was received on the little deck by Bobby. She stood for a moment looking around her. The deck looked smaller than it was in reality, and the spars and rigging more fragile and unreliable than daylight would show them. Forward she could see a great bulk. It was Glastonbury. Church and Atherfield were beside him, waiting to attend to the shore fasts. On the quay, talking to them, stood a longshoreman, ready to haul up the gangway and attend to the mooring ropes. "We'll be off now in a minute," said Bobby. "Sam's below tinkering with the engine. Wouldn't you like to come down and see your cabin?" "Oh, that can wait," said she. "I wouldn't go down just now for worlds. I want to see it all. It's more like a fairy tale or a dream than anything real I have ever known. Listen to the gulls." The gulls were clanging against the brightening east beyond Brownsea Island and the sandbanks, and the wind, freshening with the dawn, came charged with their voices and the smell of the open sea. The longshoreman came to the gangplank and hauled it in just as Sam rose from the hatch, wiping his hands with a piece of cotton waste, which he flung over the port rail as he turned to the girl and greeted her. "It's a fair wind," said Sam, "and the glass is as steady as a rock. All your luggage on board?" "Yes, everything." "Aren't you going to get any sail on her?" asked Bobby. "Not till we're out," replied the skipper of the Lorna Dune. Bobby looked at the other, now fully visible in the morning light. Sam, on his quarterdeck, so to speak, in command of a ship and about to give orders, was quite a different person from the Sam he had hitherto known. The new Sam was short of speech, a bit aloof, heedless of the girl as though she had been a mere man, and seeming absolutely indifferent to everything but the work in hand. And that was a fact. He was in the grip of the Lorna Dune, just as she was in his grip now, as he stood with his hands on the wheel spokes giving his last orders. The shore fasts came in, the little engine began to mutter, and the Lorna, gliding gently and dropping the wharf behind her, fronted the sunrise. Marcia did not look back. She was held by the view before her. For in all the world there is nothing lovelier than Poole Harbour in the sunrise of a perfect morning. Gulls raced them as they glided over the golden water, where the stakes and sea marks that outlined the passage rippled to the first of the ebb. They passed the Sandfly, deserted and snug down in her winter dress, and Brownsea Island hailed them with a chanting of gulls. Ring dotterel and herons crossed their course to the lamentable wheezing of guillemots, whilst, to complete the picture, two white swans from Abbotsbury circled in the sunlight, the boom of their flight feathers filling the air. Then the sandbank slid by, and the Isle of Wight showed the white sharpness of the needles and the banded tubular tower of their lighthouse across the sparkling water, whilst, with the engine shut off, the canvas rose thrashing in the breeze. Then Marcia, to whom all this was as new as it was strange, watched as the great main boom, upheld by the topping lifts, shook and bucked and then swung to port, straining at the main sheet, whilst the great sail, ceasing its struggles, filled hard against the blue, and the Lorna Dune, almost before the wind, drove into the swell to a sound like the fizzing of soda water. "She steers," said Sam, seeming to address the universe in general. "A child might handle her." "Oh, Lord, no," in answer to a question of Marcia's. "We won't start the engine again till we're going into harbour at Genoa. That's all the use auxiliaries are for, or if there's a flat calm close to port. Here you are, Bowler. Take the wheel and keep her as she goes." He handed the wheel over to Bowler and stood for a moment beside the girl, looking at the distant coast to starboard. Bobby, who had just come up to tell them that breakfast was ready, stood also to look, while Sam pointed out the shore marks to the girl. "That's Corfe Castle," said he, "and away right over there is St. Alban's Head. Beyond that is Weymouth Bay and Portland Bill. That? Oh, she's a Union Castle liner." "What's all that stuff on the sea there?" asked the girl, pointing across the port bow. "That's oil refuse from some ship, full of tangled-up seabirds, maybe." "Tangled-up seabirds?" "Guillemots. It's generally the guillemots that get caught. They get in the oil, and it tangles their feathers, so's they can't fly or swim. And what happens to them? They drift about and die of starvation. Oh, how frightful. Do people know? Of course they do, replied Sam. But they don't see it as we see it who use the coast. Nothing is done, though it could be easily stopped. Only just the question of putting oil separators that would pay for themselves on board the ships. Bobby listened to this talk, thinking less of the conversation than the manner of it. These two were quite easy with one another, like old acquaintances. They were old acquaintances, and yet they had met like dead strangers, and Sam had indicated that he wanted to say nothing about his past relationship with the girl. There was no possible solution of this extraordinary state of things, at least none that Bobby could discover or imagine, and, leaving it at that, he gave them word that breakfast was ready. Down below, the pleasant sunlight streaming through port and skylight lit the cabin, the white-painted bulkheads, the breakfast things laid out, and a little jar of October flowers provided by Bowler, of all people in the world. Bowler, who, to look at, seemed as destitute of all the finer feelings as a derrick, hearing that a lady was coming as passenger, had procured the flowers from his brother the longshoreman's garden. An angel could not have done better, for they made the girl feel instantly at home. "And this is your cabin," said Bobby, opening the door of the cubbyhole and exposing to view the bunk with its neat coverlet, the gadgets for holding things secure against the roll of the ship, and a bookshelf with a tiny library, an afterthought provided only the day before at Bournemouth. She looked in, lost in admiration. Then, turning and casting her eyes over everything, from the cabin carpet to the lamps swaying on their gimbals, she heaved a sigh and tried to find words to express her feelings. "Why, it's just like a little steamboat," she said. "It's absolutely and perfectly wonderful." A little steamboat. Sam's jaw fell. His Lorna Dune compared with a steamboat. However, he swallowed the insult, knowing that it proceeded from ignorance, not malice, and they sat down to table. They had lots to talk about. It was the first real meeting of the board of directors of this expedition, and Sam, without putting himself into the chair, soon exhibited the qualities of chairman and leader. He had received the ship's money from Marcia and had locked it up in the safe. It would only be needed for accidents, harbour dues, pilotage, and, in the remote event of the auxiliary breaking down on approaching a harbour, towage charges. The crew, who had received advances on their wages, would not be paid off till the Lorna returned to Poole. They talked this matter over, and then came the question of a Mediterranean base. Neither Bobby nor Marcia had thought of this part of the business. They had imagined the Lorna sailing straight ahead to the Greek archipelago without stopping anywhere. Why should they stop? Sam answered that question very easily. "You see," he said, "we've got to take water on somewhere. Haelos may have a water supply on it, or it mayn't. The fact remains that when we get there, our water tanks will be getting too low unless we touch at some port on the way and fill up. Genoa is the best place for us to touch at. First of all, I know it. Secondly, I can speak Italian of sorts. Thirdly, the port authorities are pretty easygoing. Leaving the water alone, let's come to the question of this stuff you want to salve, and which seems to me pretty much like contraband. We must be able to run straight home with it without touching port. Same time, we may have accidents, or Haelos mayn't have a water source on it, so that having taken your cargo of antiques or whatever they are on board, we may have to run to a port for water. The thing to do, of course, is to run to a place you're known in, so that you won't have trouble with the customs smelling round the ship. That's why I want to touch at Genoa, so that coming back we may be known there." He took from his pocket the map of Haelos, which Behrens had sent with the ship's money, and spread it on the table before him. The map showed the town as it lay beneath the water, the streets, the marketplace, the theatre, everything, but of the island of Haelos, beside which the sunken town lay, the map showed little, just the outline of the bay. "There you are," said Sam. "The fellow who drew this has put in streets, squares, everything about this town that's supposed to be submerged, details that are quite useless to us, seeing that we have eyes in our heads, but of the most essential thing to a working party, the presence or absence of water on the island, he says nothing." Marcia flushed slightly, and Bobby recognized that Sam had put his hoof into it. He could not say. Isaac Behrens drew that map, and she was engaged to him. He tried to catch Sam's eye, but failed. "He must have been a silly ass," said Sam, still contemplating the map. "You can see he was an archaeologist, all right, but no headpiece on him for anything else." Marcia crimsoned. "He was my best friend," said she, "and cleverer than a great many people." "I'm sorry. I didn't know," said Sam. "Cleverer than a great many people I could name," she went on, anger possessing her for a minute. "And he had headpiece enough to prevent him going off and spoiling his life just in a fit of temper. Anyhow, let us say no more about him." "Very well," said Sam. "Let us agree to do so. I did not know you knew him, or, of course, I would not have said that." He put the map away, and they rose from the table and went on deck, Bobby greatly wondering at the girl's words. Was it Sam who had gone off and spoiled his life in a fit of temper? If not, why did she fling the words and the implied fact in his face? When he had met Hackett first of all in the restaurant, he had wondered at the change in him and at the hermit life he was leading. Was it possible that before Isaac Behrens had come into Marcia's life, Sam and she had been engaged? That Sam had broken it off in a fit of temper and spoiled his life by taking to the small yacht business? It seemed the only possible solution of the mystery. Half an hour later, when the girl had gone below, he took Sam forward of the wheel where Church was steering. "She was engaged to Isaac Behrens," said he. "That's what made her cut up so rough." "How the deuce was I to know that?" answered the other. "How do people know anything? You were a friend of hers before I ever knew her." "Maybe," said Sam. "Then why did you and she meet last night, as though you were strangers, though I could see quite well you had met before? Why did you get ratty with me and say you didn't want to talk about her? Why did she speak to you like that at breakfast? What's the mystery?" "There's no mystery. My affairs are my own, and we'll be much better friends, Lestrange, if you will recognize that fact and remember it. One might think you are in love with the girl, the way you keep harping on her. Leave the thing alone. We are out on serious work. Forget that she's a girl, as I do, and we'll all be better friends. This is a deep-sea expedition with, maybe, lots of dangers ahead, not a charabanc ride to Margate." He turned away, and Bobby, snubbed and feeling a bit small, stood with his hands on the starboard rail, watching the distant coast. Sam had put his finger on the spot. He was in love with Marcia, and that was the chief reason of all his suspicions and self-questionings as to her possible past relationship to Sam. But he recognized the truth that this expedition was no holiday trip, but an affair difficult and maybe dangerous, in which there was no room for anything but strict attention to business. He determined to think no more of her as a woman till he had proved himself as a man, to put her from his mind except as a companion till the Lorna Dune was berthed at Poole Wharf and the venture a success. A decision easier come to than observed. Half an hour later, when the girl came on deck again, the English coast lay a great distance away across the blue and summer-like October sea. Portland Bill was a point on the starboard beam, and before them lay the great stretch of Lyme Bay, marked by the far-off sails of a fishing fleet and the smoke of a coastwise freighter making for Brixham. Marcia seemed to have forgotten all her anger against Sam, and when Bobby, having gone below for a smoke, returned on deck, she was at the wheel, Sam beside her, and Bowler, one great hand on a spoke, larning her to steer. Chapter 14. Genoa. Somewhere about 4 in the afternoon, Start Point showed away on the starboard beam, and with the dark, the Eddystone light, 16 miles or so away, winked at them just within the range of visibility. The wind had shifted a bit towards the south, and the nip had gone out of the air, but no clouds showed. St. Luke's little summer held the channel, and the warm, dark night was full of lights talking to one another through the great silence that was broken only by the creak of block and spar and the whisper of the bow wash. Bolthead and the Eddystone and the red and green lights of shipping were all domed by the stars, against which the great spread of the mainsail showed black beneath the truck, writing its tale of adventure on the heavens. They passed Ushant next morning, carrying the fine weather with them into the bay. They passed the bay, and the Barlengus Islands handed them on to Cape St. Vincent. And then, one day, never to be forgotten by Marcia, far ahead before them stood Africa, facing Europe in a blaze of sunshine across the narrow straits. The wind was with them. The west wind is generally blowing through the gut of Gibraltar. They passed the Rock, a great P&O boat, homeward bound, giving them her wash and a string of coloured flags that wished them a pleasant voyage. And then, through days of blazing sunshine and nights of stars and winking sea lights, they coasted the southern shores of Spain till the Balearics showed like a cloud on the starboard bow and sank astern like burning ships in the blaze of a sunset never to be forgotten. Then one morning, just as Marcia was dressed, a hail from above brought her on deck, and there across the sea lay Genoa. Genoa terraced and glittering in the early sunlight above the crowded harbour and the foam-washed breakwater. Genoa throned on her hills facing San Fruitiosa and the tombs of the Dorias across the glittering sea. Genoa la Superba, yet a trader at heart now, as in the past. A pilot boat ran out to meet them, and as the pilot came on board, Sam, his work and responsibility finished with for the moment, turned to the rail and lit a pipe, whilst the girl, standing by him, watched as, passing the eastern end of the breakwater, they came into the outer harbour, and from there into the inner, beside which lay the great Haelos de Genoa. Genoa is the Southampton of Italy, and here were ships the form and lines and names of which the girl had never imagined or heard of. Ships of the Nederland line and the Holland Oost-Azie line, the great South American liner Conte Verde, close to which the pilot moored them, a turret boat of the Clan line, coasters from Savona, Leghorn and Naples that seemed to have been built by Noah, an old green ship rotting at its anchorage, and a fruit boat from Sicily full of bronzed men, graceful as Apollos. Then the port authorities came off in their launch, gave them pratique, examined their papers, threw up their hands at the mad English who had come all the way from England in such a small boat just for fun, and departed, smiling, at Marcia. "And now," said Sam, "let's get ashore. Bowler will look after the ship. We can have breakfast at the Miramare. That's that big hotel up there you can see to the left of the silos. And then we can go for a cruise round the town." Marcia's mind jumped at the idea, and yet, strangely enough, something held her back. Women have their premonitory warnings that come from nowhere, but her doubt lasted only for a moment. "Why not have breakfast here and then go ashore?" said she. "It's only 8:30, and we have the whole day before us." "I want to stretch my legs," said Sam, "and as we'll be off tomorrow morning, we may as well make the most of our time, unless you'd rather breakfast here." "Oh, I don't mind," said she. "If you want to, let's go." Bowler rowed them ashore, and landing at the quay by the silos, they took the lift that brings passengers from the lower level right into the premises of the great hotel. Here they breakfasted, surrounded by all the nations of the world in the form of tourists. Sam was in the highest of spirits, laughing and talking, and self-congratulatory on the success of the voyage up to this. This was a new Sam. Bobby had never once seen him like this since the Oxford days, and was pleased at the change, little dreaming of the newer Sam he was to see before nightfall. There is a hairdressing shop for men and women attached to the Miramare, and after breakfast the skipper of the Lorna Dune, lighting a big cigar and leaving the others seated in the lounge, went off to be barbered. "I won't be a minute," said Sam. He was half an hour, and it was 10 minutes to 11 before, delivered from the hotel and the lift, they took a tram for the Piazza di Ferrari. Modern Genoa is divided into two parts, the harbour town and the eastern town of fine shops and business houses. Having bought some things, they had luncheon at a cafe on the Piazza Acqua Verde, and here, after luncheon, they lost Sam. They lost him in a crowd caused by a big fascist demonstration, marching with drums and banners, and they could not find him again. "He'll be all right," said Bobby. "He knows the place better than we do, and he'll go back to the boat when he's tired. Come on. We haven't done the Campo Santo yet, nor a single church. Which shall it be?" "The Campo Santo," said Marcia. "I've often heard of it and would like to see it. But are you sure Mr. Hackett will be all right?" "Absolutely," said Bobby. "And it serves him right being such a fool as to lose himself. We can't hunt for him all day." He hailed a taxicab and drove to the great cemetery, but Marcia's interest in the marble tombs, the family groups, the widowers in marble frock-coats, and the enormousness and enormity of the whole place was marred by the vision of Sam, lost and maybe still hunting for them, wandering like a stray dog. She felt that they had deserted him, and it was a relief to her when they reached the quay at last and took a shore boat to the Lorna Dune. Sam had not returned. Bobby looked at his watch. "It's only 5:30, said he. "He's sure to be back soon. If he isn't, I'll go ashore and have a hunt for him." "He couldn't have got into trouble or anything?" asked the girl. "Not he. He's just amusing himself. He'll be back by 6. But 6 passed without the return of the missing one, and 7. At 8 o'clock, as much disturbed as the girl, Bobby put ashore and landed at the Silo Quay, told Bowler to stick by the landing stage with the boat, and started on his hunt. He had not far to go. On a bollard near the shore end of the quay, conversing jocularly with several Italian boatmen and punctuating his remarks with hiccups, was seated Sam. "Hello," said Sam. "What on earth have you been doing?" asked Bobby, shocked by this new development and scarcely believing his senses. "Where have you been?" "All over the place," said the skipper of the Lorna Dune. "Gives your arm." Now the funny thing was that Bobby, who knew Sam's Oxford record for brightness and liveliness, and who had not seen him for years before their meeting in the restaurant, was shocked by his present condition almost as much as though Samuel had been a rural dean, shall we say. Yet perhaps the thing was not so funny after all, for the skipper of the Lorna Dune had up to this shown no deviation from the normal. Furthermore, he was not of the type that produces drinking men. As a matter of fact, Sam did not care for drink in the least in the ordinary way. "I know," said he in reply to Bobby's comment, and taking the other's arm. "It's silly of me to get like this. Let's take a walk round. I want to swing my compass before going on board. Not fit to meet her like this." "Shall I get you a bed at the hotel?" asked Bobby. "No," said Sam. They left the quay and walked along the road that leads to the station. "No," went on the skipper after a long pause, and as if in reply to a repeat of the invitation. "I don't want beds at any hotels. I'll be all right presently, and all the better for it. I meant to do it when I started this morning. I had to get her off my mind." Bobby felt unhappy. He did not want to hear the confidences of a man whose intellect was under a cloud, and he tried to turn the conversation. "Forget it all," said he. "You'll be as right as rain when you've had a sleep." "Forget it all? If you'd got a girl in your head? If you'd gone the mucker I have? If—" Again Bobby tried to stop him, but Samuel Hackett, taking the bit in his teeth, broke into open confession and spun a yarn. So wandering, however, and so confused that all Bobby could make out was that deponent, sometime in the past, had loved a girl, became engaged to her, broken off the engagement owing to a mutual quarrel, and sacrificed his brilliant future, whatever it was, for the life of a small yachtsman. He had 500 a year of his own. Presumably the girl was Marcia Hare, though he mentioned no names, and the close proximity in the Lorna Dune life had brought about this crisis. This was a nice complex in an affair already complex enough. If Sam, the hub of this expedition, were to be subjected to crises like this every time Marcia became too much for his feelings, what might not the upshot be? It came into Bobby's head just then what Marcia had said in his first interview with her about editors and their predilection for stories with a female interest, a predilection born of nothing but the business instinct telling them what the public wants. It seemed to him that the public was not far wrong, and that if the interest of any story depended upon its complexity, elements of surprise, and possible dramatic developments, a woman was absolutely necessary in it. All the same, he wasn't writing a story, but engaged in a deal that might lead the whole lot of them into unknown trouble should any hitch occur. This fact had been developing in his mind during the voyage, helped maybe by the sea air and the absence of all other worries. Behrens, it seemed to him, had not fully gauged the possibilities of this business if it went wrong. Behrens was an old man whose life had been spent in auction rooms and the atmosphere of shady deals. He was absolutely to be trusted as a friend, but as a business antagonist, he was a bandit, pure and simple. He would not cheat a customer or sell faked goods as real stuff, but he would take any and every advantage conferred upon him by his knowledge of business and the length of his purse. The sacking of Haelos to Behrens was a perfectly legitimate undertaking. To Bobby, during the last fortnight or so, the question had been steadily recurring as to whether Behrens had not underestimated the seriousness of it should the Greek government step in by any chance and find them at work. Bobby had no doubt as to the morality of rescuing for personal profit stuff that had been lying for long centuries under the sea, whenever it might be found. All the same, he had grave doubts as to what the upshot might be should they be detected. The situation was serious, and this grave defect that had suddenly shown itself in Sam made it more so. After half an hour's walk up and down the vile street by the wharves, the skipper's compass seemed to be coming into order again, and he declared himself fit to return on board. Marcia was on deck when they drew alongside, and she seemed to notice nothing as Sam, on the dark deck and controlling himself, explained that he had been to the pictures. Then he went below, and the girl and Bobby were left alone. The night was warm as a night in August, and Genoa, spangled with lights, looked down upon her harbour, where the great ships lay with their ports and anchor lights spilling amber on the water. A Dutch boat, ripping up the night with her siren, was putting to sea from the outer harbour, and the tangling of a mandolin came across the water from where the fruit boats lay, beyond the great bulk of the Conte Verde. Bobby was greatly exercised in his mind. To speak about Sam's recent condition, if he were really in love with Marcia, seemed an act of disloyalty, considering that he, Bobby, was also in the same condition as regarded her. Still, it was unfair to the girl to keep silent. She was sharing the risk they all ran, and she ought to know everything. "I'm rather worried about Hackett," said he at last. "He's the best of good fellows, but I think his mind is upset a bit about something, and he's been dining on shore, and—" "I know," said Marcia. "The bother is," said he, "this isn't an ordinary pleasure cruise. We all want our heads screwed on tight. It's risky, and I'm worried about you." "Why me?" "Well, if anything goes wrong, I don't want you to be let in for it. I'm not saying anything will, but all the same, one never knows. You know how I bothered you to come. Well, I almost wish I hadn't." "That's nonsense," said Marcia. "I don't mind risk. We are doing nothing wrong. I went into the whole thing in my mind before I decided to come. What we are going to do is no more harm than picking blackberries belonging to no one. These things you hope to get belong to no one. That's the whole thing in a nutshell." This feminine logic seemed to Bobby all right in its way amongst themselves, but dubious as an argument to advance before the government at Athens should fate land them at the Piraeus in charge of some wretched tin-pot man-of-war. "There's still time for you to think twice of it," said he. "You could go home from here." "Do you want me to go?" "I do, and I don't," replied Bobby. "Then I won't," said she. "I'm not that sort of person. Mr. Hackett is a splendid sailor, and I have no fear of the sea with him. And if he did behave stupidly today, men sometimes do stupid things. I am sure he won't do it again. Besides, he won't be on shore again till we get home. Go back and not see that wonderful place under the sea and have all the fun of fishing for those things. I'd rather die than go back." "I'm glad you feel like that," said Bobby. "I felt that I ought to put the thing before you. You don't think it mean of me, peaching on Sam? I just had to tell you, seeing the position we are in." "Oh, he peached on himself," said Marcia, laughing. "I knew at once when he spoke. I'll say nothing and he'll never know. He'll be himself again tomorrow." She was right. The skipper of the Lorna was on deck at sunrise next morning. He had remembered the water tanks. They were filled by 8, and at 9 o'clock the Lorna, under her auxiliary engine, cleared the port of Genoa and spread her wings for the Isles of Greece. Chapter 15. Towards Haelos. They passed through the Straits of Messina one brilliant morning, the west wind still holding, the sea like a tray of broken sapphires, and Etna a cone of almost translucent purple against the flower-blue sky. A Nautilus fleet was going with them with sails set to the favouring wind, and away to starboard Sicilian fishing boats, putting out for the Lipari Islands dotted the sea. Marcia, alone on deck for a moment, but for Bowler at the wheel, and Church and Atherfield forward, gazing from the Sicilian to the Italian shore, breathed deep, half intoxicated with the brilliancy and beauty of it all. Then her eyes fell on Bowler, his gaze fixed on the compass card, and the others, indifferent to their surroundings as though they were in the Thames estuary, and she remembered what Sam had said to Bobby and repeated to her, that these men cared for nothing but their own immediate interests and wants, that the great god Pan hauled alive and kicking out of the waters of Haelos would move them scarcely more than the capture of a porpoise, that they were a crew of blind men, safe to hold their tongues when they returned home. She came to understand how, even if Greek fishermen looking down through the water had observed the submerged town, as undoubtedly they had in the course of centuries, the sight would have moved them not at all, would have been forgotten when seen, or scarcely remembered, having nothing to do with their interests, their comfort, or their welfare. It seemed to her that a great book could be written on the blindness of the world, and not only on the blindness of common people, but of every man towards everything unconnected with his own special desires and ambitions. She was thinking this when Bobby's head emerged from the saloon hatch. He glanced around, seemingly as indifferent to the beauties about him as Bowler. Then he called to the girl. "Come down," said Bobby. "We've got the charts out, and I want you to have a look at them." Sam was in the cabin in his shirt sleeves, before the table littered with charts and maps. "Here we are," said the skipper of the Lorna, pointing to their position on the map. "We'll be into the Ionian Sea when we've passed the Straits, and then it will be a straight run for the Straits of Cervy. From that, it's only 80 or 90 miles to Haelos. It's not marked on the map, it's too small, but it's on the charts. It's just about there, 70 miles or so south of Milo." Marcia looked at the map and at the great strew of islands to the east of Greece, stretching from Euboea to Santorin. Islands of eternal summer still tinged with the light of the Golden Age. She had read them up before leaving England, and she could tell the others things they did not know. 70 miles south of Milo," said she. "That's where the Venus came from." "Which Venus?" asked Bobby. "The Venus of Milo." "Oh, that thing without arms," said Sam, putting the map aside and spreading a chart. "Yes, that thing without arms, the most beautiful statue in the world. A peasant found it. He was pulling down a heap of stones, and there it was. All these islands, at least the big ones, must have been full of beautiful works of art once. I can't understand it. You have a civilization capable of producing these things, and then it vanishes, and the people who come after smash them and destroy them, pull down the temple of the Venus of Milo, break all the figures of the Parthenon, and even haven't the eyes to find what we are going to find at Haelos. The Greeks deserve to lose their art treasures." "They are going to lose the ones at Haelos anyhow," said Bobby. "No, they aren't," said Marcia. "How can a man lose what he doesn't possess? Anyhow, what he doesn't deserve to possess. If a man possesses a horse and treats it badly, it's taken away from him, isn't it? It's just the same here." "Well, I'm not bothering about the Greeks so much as the reefs," cut in Sam. "Look, here's the chart of the waters round Haelos, and I'll bet a sovereign the soundings are all wrong. You see, they haven't bothered about the island or the bay. The place is only a rock to be avoided, but the reefs are given. Here to the north, where the bay lies, it's all reefs, overlapping. Doesn't seem to be a decent passage a ship could take. Look." The girl sat down and examined the chart, and Bobby, watching them, forgot everything, even the expedition itself, his mind engaged again with the exasperating problem set for it by these two people. There was something between them sufficient to make Sam fly off the handle at Genoa, and yet, in the ordinary shipboard affairs, as now, they seemed almost indifferent to one another's existence, just ordinary shipmates. And yet Sam had distinctly given him to understand that his aberration at Genoa was due to a girl who was in his mind, had as good as said that the girl was Marcia. Taking the whole business from the start, every indication pointed to the same conclusion, which was this. Sam had once been engaged to the girl, or at all events they had been in love with each other. Then Isaac Behrens had turned up and captured the affections of the lady, and the idiotic Sam had gone off in a rage and spoiled his life by throwing his prospects away and taking to longshore life at Poole. What made Bobby bother about the whole business was the fact that he was in love himself. Marcia had fascinated him from the first, and the close acquaintance of shipboard life had not decreased that fascination. Day by day her hold had grown upon him. Had they been on shore, leading an ordinary life, he would have declared himself at once, or even before this. But the expedition tied him. Whatever his feelings might be, it was impossible to show them till this business was complete and the work before them finished. All the same, that night when he was alone on deck with her, with Church at the wheel and Atherfield on the lookout, something in the depths of his mind rose up and spoke. "Did you know much of Sam before he went off and took up with the yachting business?" asked he. "No," replied Marcia. "Very little." She spoke in an ordinary tone, as though Hackett was of no account at all to her, and mystified more than ever, but relieved in his mind, he said no more. Chapter 16. Haelos. 2 mornings later, as they were finishing breakfast, Sam suddenly rose from the table. His sharp ear had caught something unheard by the others, but they heard the voice of Atherfield, who was steering. "Where away?" And the voice of Church, who was on the lookout, faint against the wind. "On the starboard bow." "Land," said Sam. They left the table and came on deck. Away on the starboard bow, above the horizon of the blue and empty sea, a point showed clear in that crystal air, remote, like the sail of a ship dyed with Tyrian purple. The glass resolved it into a vast rock 200 feet in height, cleft at the summit and broadened at the base, the highest peak of an island whose low shore was vaguely indicated. "Haelos," said Sam, handing the glass to the girl. Holding a stay and steadying the glass, she looked. Nothing but sea, skyline. Then, as she shifted the glass, the great rock, lavender and purple, with its broken crest and spurs and gullies, broke into view, leaped at her across the sea, captured her mind and imagination forever with its desolation and loneliness. It was less a rock than a vast monolith, a column of a single stone erected before Troy was a city or Athens a town. On it might have been written, "I saw the Persian ships pass on their way to the beach of Marathon, and the Argo sailing to find the Golden Fleece. I was here before Sappho sang, and at my base lies Haelos, a town of dreams sunk in an enchanted sea." That was how the distant vision spoke to Marcia. Sam, taking the glass back from her, had another long look. Then he turned to the steersman. "Keep her as she goes," said Sam. "We want to get well to the north." Then he turned to Bobby. "Get a fellow ready forward with the lead, and then fetch me that chart up. Number A chart. You'll find it on top of the others in the chart locker. Bowler, get a tackle ready for lowering the boat. I'll anchor outside, if I can find decent holding ground, and take soundings with the boat. How's the glass?" "Glass is steady, sir." The Lorna carried 2 boats, a solid clinker-built 4-oar for shore work and the diving business, and a collapsible dinghy. The skipper of the Lorna, having glanced at the boat, went to the sail-room. Here he had stored a lot of other things besides canvas. Before leaving Poole, he had studied the whole of this affair and worked it out to the minutest detail. The sail-room contained, amongst other things, 6 or 8 lobster pot buoys with ground tackle, also a croquet set box labelled "Dangerous, Don't Touch," containing dynamite charges, a small electric battery, and the wiring necessary for deep-sea blasting operations. He brought the buoys out now and placed them on the deck. Then he turned to the chart which Bobby had given him, and laying it on the cabin skylight, pored over it, memorizing once again the lie of the reefs. There was one good thing. In this all but tideless sea, the difference between low and high water was next to nothing. The reefs did not play hide and seek, and, as a matter of fact, the reefs north of Haelos were frank almost to the point of frightfulness. An hour later, with Haelos full in view, they showed themselves, faint lines of foam where the flower-blue sea broke gently to the heave of the swell, traces of purple, and over all, gulls flying and calling. The Lorna held on. The helm had been shifted, and the island lay no longer on the starboard bow, but straight ahead. On and on, the voices of the gulls growing clearer, and the get away of the guillemots sharper against the wind, while Sam, who had swarmed up to the cross-trees, swept the reef lines from east to west with his gaze. It was easy to understand why the Bay of Haelos, with its hidden treasures, had lain sealed through all the years. Only in one place, towards the westward end of the shark-toothed reefs, was there an opening through them, a blue line of clean water, too narrow for a full-sized ship to pass, but sufficiently broad for a vessel of small tonnage. Strangely enough, the fact that this was the only way of entrance simplified the whole problem enormously. Since there was only one way in, and that way had evidently been taken by Isaac Beren's boat, it stood to reason that it must be a fair way. It must, from the very fact of its narrowness, be free of danger from rocks, as Beren's boat would have had no room for manoeuvring, and permanently free since there were no tides. Sam came down at a run. His whole plans were changed. He ordered the buoys and tackle to be put back in the sail room, the canvas to be taken in and stowed, and the auxiliary engine started. Then he went aloft again to con the ship. The reefs drew closer. The whisper of them came now through the faint thud of the little engine, and the challenging gulls, like snowflakes against the blue sky, flew around and above the Lorna, shouting, calling, passing away on the wind only to return, whilst the gently heaving swell broke now on the rocks to port and starboard, and the narrow line of blue water ahead seemed to grow narrower. "We'll never get through," murmured Marcia, half to herself, half to Bobby, as they stood in the bow with the reefs a biscuit toss on either side. Ouch! A heave of the swell had taken charge of them, so that for a moment the steerage way seemed lost. She shut her eyes. "We're through," said Bobby. She opened them. Only 50 yards of passage separated them from clear water, into which they passed, gliding with engine shut off over the surface of a vast bay. A bay 2 miles long by a mile wide, a bay closed to the sea by the reefs, and whose water changed in colour from aquamarine beneath the keel to emerald, and from emerald to the blue of sapphire. The shore showed nothing but boulders, sand patches, and desolation, above which the great hill of rock stood, gaunt and seamed with gullies, sharp cut against the cloudless sky. They were at the western end, and the 2-mile stretch of water to east of them seemed infinite in extent, whilst beyond the reefs through which they had passed the outer sea lay hard and brilliant as a gem. As the anchor fell and the Lorna rode to her moorings, Bobby looked overside. Nothing but rock and sand patches, showing clear as through air in the diamond-bright water. He had forgotten for a moment that the submerged town lay, unless its existence was a dream of Isaac Beren's, in the eastern side of the bay. Marcia reminded him of this fact. As for Sam, he had not even glanced over. He was busy snugging things down, and as indifferent to his surroundings as though he had been in Poole Harbour. When everything was right, he ordered the boat to be got over. They crowded into her immediately, and, with Bowler and Church at the oars, started. "It'll be down to the east side of the bay," said Sam, "if it's here at all." He had taken the yoke lines and was steering. "Here at all," said the girl. "Of course it's here." His words, as though casting a doubt upon Isaac's story, wounded her. "What makes you think it's not?" "Oh, I don't know," said he. "It's only that, in my experience, things once they're sunk on the sea floor aren't found again as a rule. Look at Tobermory. Of course, there are no tides here, but it's in the earthquake zone, and one never knows." Sam was right enough. Once the sea has grasped a thing, be it ship or treasure, she holds it, hides it, defends it by all sorts of trickery. Very, very rarely is anything recovered from her clutch once it has been held for even a few years. But the case of Haelos was different from all other cases. It had been seen and mapped recently, and it was unlikely that any earthquake disturbance would have destroyed or covered it from sight since then. Bobby said this. Then, leaning over the starboard gunwale whilst the girl bent over the port side, they watched, gazing deep down through the clear, bright water, the floor of the bay shimmering up at them through the undulations caused by the oars. Nothing. Sand and rock, fish fleeting here and there, the long red ribbon fish of the Mediterranean and Aegean, a base followed by its black shadow on the floor, a silver shoal of sardines, a globe jellyfish, and a number of cup-shaped jellyfish opening and closing like umbrellas as they pumped their way along. Nothing more. The leisurely creak of the oars sounded against the far crying of the gulls. The sun struck hot on their backs as they leant watching for that which never showed itself. And now, as minute after minute passed, and though they had not quite reached the eastern zone of the bay, there came to Bobby that horrible clutch at the throat known to the man who sees before him defeat, the man who sees the horse that carries his fortune falling back in the race. Had Isaac Behrens suffered from illusion? Had the floor of the bay altered? Had they come to the wrong place? And was this not Haelos, after all? He did not dare to ask the questions aloud. Confused and dizzy with the heat of the sun, he continued gazing. Nothing. Though they rowed forever and gazed forever, nothing would they see but the rocks and the sand and the fish. All their work was undone and their labours in vain. Then suddenly a great white mass shot up waveringly, as though to strike the keel of the boat, and Bobby, expecting the crash, yelled to the rowers to stop. There was no crash. The thing was fathoms under, and now, as the boat floated placidly, gazing over, they saw shimmering up at them not rock and sand, but what seemed the interior of a vast white shallow bowl over the rim of which they had passed. It was the theatre of Haelos, a theatre once open to the sky and breezes, once filled with people who had vanished from the earth before Christ was born. Broken and ruined in places, the tiers of marble seats still showed, in parts almost perfect. Sam, who had brought the map of Isaac Behrens with him, spread it on his knee. "Yes," said he, quite unmoved by what was lying beneath them. "That's the theatre all right, and it's lying just where it should be by the map. It's the most westerly building of the town. Here's a note that says, 'It being possibly beyond the city wall, of which there is no distinct trace.'" Marcia scarcely heard him. She was fascinated. She could have gazed forever. In that moment she caught the spirit and inner meaning of this lost town with a vividness that never came again. This town once filled with life and beauty and laughter, set now in the crystal silence of the sea. And it had been there before she was born, before the Victorian age and the age of Elizabeth, before the Norman conquest, and when Romulus was making his wall, which was to expand and ring the mighty Roman Empire, it had been there, just as now, preserved in the clear and tideless water of this bay, watched only by the seagulls. Then the theatre began to fall away and vanish behind them. The boat was moving slowly forward under the direction of Sam, and now beneath them lay ruins. Heaps of marble blocks lying as though cast about by a giant, and broken columns, suggestive of some great building gone to ruin, glimmered up at them and passed astern, giving place to a level floor where there was nothing. "This would be the agora," said Sam, referring to the map, on which Isaac Behrens had marked not only the streets and places, but their names, names of his own invention, except in the cases of the theatre and the agora, or marketplace. "Hermes Street opens on the right of it, the Street of Victory on the left of it. Let's have a look at Victory Street first. Go slow, bowler." He steered to the left, and the agora passed under them, the boat's shadow flitting across it as the shadows of gulls and swallows had flitted in ancient days. They could see the ruts in its floor, made by wheeled traffic, and now to the right, the standing columns of what had once been a roofed colonnade. Then again, as in the case of their approach to the theatre, something rose through the water ahead of them as if to hit the keel. Houses. Houses closing this, the north side of the marketplace, houses whose walls rose to within a fathom and a half of the surface. The old Greek house had no roof. It was, in fact, a courtyard surrounded by rooms and open to the sky, a covered colonnade running round the tiny courtyard. Looking down now as the boat slowly drifted, they could see the colonnade roofs within a few yards of the keel, and the square courtyards whose tessellated floors showed vague patterns through the waving water. Spaces lay between these houses of a vanished world, spaces that had once been dark and narrow lanes, broader spaces that had once perhaps been gardens, and all lay here shy, secret, hidden, yet suddenly revealed. It was like opening the hand of time and looking at things never intended to be seen by living eyes. They had drifted over the houses on the right-hand side of Victory Street, and now, with a stroke of an oar and a shift of the helm, they came upon the street itself. Broad almost as Regent Street it lay beneath them, the houses on the left vaguely visible, the houses they had just passed over close and clear to sight. Actually, in this gin-bright water, as in some Pacific lagoon, things at a depth of 6 or 7 fathoms were more clearly visible than they would have been if seen through air. As in the agora, here too, the wheel ruts of long-forgotten traffic showed, and here and there in front of a house a little cone-shaped column lay, the Apollo of the street, once the guardian of the house to which it belonged. Sam ordered the oars in and let the boat drift. There was a gentle current here, setting north in the direction in which the street ran, and Bowler and his mate, released from their work, condescended to look over and take an interest in what was going on. "You've never seen houses and a street like that before, Bowler?" said the girl, flushed with excitement and looking up at the other. "No, miss, I don't remember that I have," replied the salt. "It's the clear water shows 'em up. There's a place like this off Suffolk, where there's a church and all sunk close offshore, but you can't see nothing, the water being thick." "Hoy! Look at that fish!" cried the other fellow. "Ain't it a big un?" An enormous bream, stolen out of some back alley, had caught the sun. Then, frightened by the boat shadow, with a twist of its tail, it turned and vanished. The boat floated on. Then, glimmering up at them from the street centre, something white showed, a small mound of marble blocks. No, a group of statuary gone to ruin. It was their first find. Up to this, they had seen nothing of man's handiwork, with the exception of the theatre and the houses, the street, and the broken Apollos of the street. This was different. The oars were got out to stop the drift, and gazing over, they absorbed the vision beneath them. When Haelos, with a great shudder, had sunk 8 fathoms below the sea level, here in the street of Hermes, a wonderful group of statuary must have fallen, shaken at the base. Close to the little heap of white ruins lay a marble chariot wheel and a horse's head. A headless, marble-winged woman with one wing broken lay near the wheel. The appealing charm of these things was their small size. The winged woman could not have been more than 4 feet in height when standing in her chariot. The horses not so large as Shetland ponies. The wheel as it lay seemed not more than thrice the diameter of a dinner plate. Splendor of size had evidently no charm for the people of Haelos. The statuary had represented a Victory, standing in her chariot driving her horses across the face of the world. How lovely the thing must have been in its delicate minuteness, when complete might be guessed by the little horse's head showing in profile from the floor of the street, a head beautiful as that of the horse of the moon that once graced the eastern pediment of the Parthenon. That mutilated woman and that severed head were worth, alone, all the trouble of the expedition. That little horse's head of marble filled with fire, what would it not fetch in a world where art is not, only art dealers? The Victory had fallen prone, the face could not be seen. "Can we get them up?" asked Marcia, appealing to Sam. "Now? At once? I want to hold that little wheel in my hands. Oh, the poor, lovely, broken things." Her voice failed, her eyes were filled with tears. Haelos had spoken to her through this little shattered dream, more appealing than any work of grandeur and magnificence. "Yes," said the skipper. "We can get them up easy enough, but not now." I'll have to bring the ship right over here and rig a tackle. You can't do that in a minute. We've got the location, and it's easy to pick it up again. Let's go on and see what else there is. The rowers, at his direction, put the boat forward with a stroke of the oars, and then let her drift, correcting her course now and then, whilst the street of Victory passed beneath them, showing now a fallen column that had once stood proudly in its centre, and now a Hermes of the street that had fallen from some house front, and now a grim fact. The street had suddenly grown narrow, the houses dwarfed, almost hovels. They had come upon poverty. Haelos, old as history itself, had its slums just as London has its slums, and New York. It seemed to say to the gazers, "Look, here is the evil that runs through all cities, in all times. So it was in ancient Athens, so it ever will be." Marcia, the most sensitive of the boat's crew, ceased gazing down into the water and turned her eyes across the sunlit bay to where the Lorna Dune was riding at her anchor. A curious feeling of depression had now come over her. It had been stealing upon her mind almost imperceptibly from the moment when, looking down, she had seen the wheel tracks on the pavement of the marketplace. Now, raising her eyes to the blue and sunlit bay, the living, laughing gulls, the perfect sky, the town beneath the keel seemed almost terrible, almost sinister, almost evil. This feeling in its acutest form lasted only a moment. It passed, but there still remained the vague depression. "I don't know how you feel," said she to the others, "but I'd like to go back to the Lorna for a while and rest. We've succeeded, haven't we? Everything is as it should be. But it's a bit overpowering at first. It wants getting used to." "I was just feeling the same," said Bobby. "I want to sit down and think and smoke a pipe over it." "Right," said Sam. He altered the helm, and the rowers taking to their oars, the boat turned and headed due west across the sparkling water. The skipper of the Lorna Dune, without admitting it, had seen enough for the present moment. The thing wanted getting used to, and he was silent as he steered, an unlit pipe between his teeth. It was Bowler who spoke. He was rowing stern oar. "How long do you think them old houses has been sunk, sir?" asked Bowler, addressing Bobby. "Ages ago," said Bobby, waking from a reverie. "Ages before William the Conqueror landed in England, and that's a good many years, Bowler." "Would it be 100, sir?" "Yes, and more than that." Bowler, satisfied in his mind on this point, spoke no more, and the boat creaked on reaching the Lorna, where they scrambled on board. Later, getting on for sundown, Bobby, who had come on deck, leaving the others resting below, heard voices from the forecastle. The whole crew, Glastonbury included, were in the forecastle smoking and talking. A furious discussion was going on, presumably on the wonders of Haelos, and Bobby, anxious to hear what was said, paused by the forecastle hatch to listen. Came Church's voice. It weren't him. It was Black Jack. They wouldn't serve him no more at the anchor, and he comes to the Bull. The girl drew him a glass, but seeing him rocking like a ninepin, took it back. Up he gets a knee on the bar, and over he'd have been only for Benson, the landlord, who was sitting talking to Hammond. Benson caught him by the foot and brought him down all standing and chucked him out, and that was the beginning of the whole business. Swore Benson had kicked him in the innards, he did, and got his license took from him. "That's so," came the deep voice of Bowler. "I was there. So much for the wonders of Haelos.